Imagine waking up to headlines that your tax dollars, money meant to feed children, house seniors, and support families were stolen. Not once, not twice, but hundreds of times across one state. And now, the very people who promised accountability are the ones under fire. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the billion-dollar fraud wave, shaking Minnesota, the same state led by Tim Walz and represented by Ilhan Omar. What's emerging is a stunning web of shell nonprofits, fake aid programs, and political silence that reaches far beyond one city. Let's unpack how this all started, why the media prefers to stay quiet, and what it means when the watchdogs of power become part of the story. We're going to walk through something that should concern every American, but especially those of us who've been around long enough to remember when public service meant something. We're talking about Minnesota, a state that over the past few years has become ground zero for what federal investigators are now calling one of the largest public fraud operations in modern American history. We're talking about possibly over $1 billion in stolen funds. Programs designed to help the most vulnerable were turned into cash machines for criminals. And two names keep surfacing in the background of this unfolding disaster: Governor Tim Walz and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Now, I want to be clear from the start, this isn't about picking political sides. This is about understanding how systems break down, how power can shield wrongdoing, and why you and I, as taxpayers and citizens, have every right to demand answers. So let's dive deep together and see what's really been happening in Minnesota. For months, maybe even years, everyday Americans were asking the same question: when will someone be held accountable? It felt like nothing was moving fast enough. But then, something shifted. In Minnesota, what began as whispers of mismanagement has exploded into a full-scale federal crackdown involving investigations, indictments, and convictions piling up faster than anyone expected. Federal agents from the FBI, IRS Criminal Investigation, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General, working alongside state fraud units, began conducting site visits and executing search warrants across the Minneapolis street pole area. What they found should absolutely shock you. They uncovered schemes using shell nonprofits, fake companies, falsified meal count sheets, and phantom clients to steal hundreds of millions of dollars from federally funded state programs, including the Child Nutrition Program and Medicaid Housing Stabilization Services. This systematic theft was happening in plain sight, woven into the fabric of state-funded programs that were supposed to be helping people. Now, why does this matter to you? Because these weren't just bureaucratic slip-ups or minor paperwork errors. These were organized, deliberate efforts to steal public money. Money that could have gone to real seniors struggling with housing costs, money that could have fed actual children in need, money that could have supported health care for people with disabilities. Instead, it lined the pockets of fraudsters who saw government programs as easy targets. And here's where it gets even more troubling. As these investigations began to heat up and names started being named, one familiar political figure kept appearing in the background: Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Now, I want you to hear me clearly. We have to be careful with language here. In our modern world, simply discussing connections can get you accused of all sorts of things. So let's just say that she is allegedly tied to some of these organizations, and individuals are raising serious questions, and those questions deserve answers. Let me paint a picture for you. Think about your own community. Think about the local organizations that help people: the food banks, the housing assistance programs, the nonprofits that step in when families hit hard times. Now imagine if those organizations, instead of helping, were fronts for stealing millions of dollars. Imagine if the people running them were faking records, inventing clients, and pocketing the cash while real families went hungry. That's what happened in Minnesota, and the scale is almost beyond belief. One of the programs at the center of this storm was called Feeding Our Future. On paper, it sounded wonderful. A nonprofit designed to provide meals to children and families, especially during the pandemic when so many people were struggling. The program received federal funding, routed through the state, with the promise that every dollar would go toward feeding kids who otherwise might go hungry. But federal prosecutors now say that somewhere between $200 and $300 million of that money was stolen through fake invoices, shell restaurants, and phantom meal programs. Let me say that again, because it's important. Between $200 and $300 million stolen from a program meant to feed children. How does something like that even happen? Well, investigators found that many of these so-called feeding sites didn't exist. People were billing the government for tens of thousands of meals a day that were never prepared, never delivered, never eaten. They set up fake companies, rented empty storefronts, and created paperwork that looked legitimate on the surface. And for a while, it worked. Money poured in, month after month, while children who actually needed help were left with nothing. And here's where Ilhan Omar's name enters the picture. There's video footage publicly available showing her at an event for one of these organizations. She's serving food, praising the work being done, talking about how important these programs are for her community, and the man she's standing next to, his name is Salim Saeed, and he later became one of the central figures in the Feeding Our Future fraud case. His restaurant was used as a front for billing the government for meals that never happened. He admitted to making over $1 million in profit from a $75,000 investment. And there she is, right beside him, celebrating the program. Now, does that mean she knew what was happening? Not necessarily. Does it mean she was involved in the fraud? We can't say that. But what it does mean is this: the people she publicly supported, the organizations she vouched for, the programs she defended, they were stealing from you, from me, from every taxpayer in America. And when the Minnesota Department of Education, overseen by Governor Walz's administration, started cutting off funding and demanding accountability in late 2020 and early 2021, she was one of the loudest voices pushing back. The MDE grew suspicious of the explosive growth in funding, but when they tried to stop payments, Feeding Our Future sued the state. Omar went on television, held press conferences, and talked about how cutting funding to meal programs was cruel, how it would hurt refugees and vulnerable communities. The MDE was ultimately compelled by a state judge to resume payments while the fraud investigation continued. But what she didn't talk about was the fraud. She didn't talk about the hundreds of millions of dollars being stolen. She didn't talk about the fake organizations, the sham marriages, the forged documents. Instead, she positioned herself as a defender of the vulnerable, even as the very programs she defended were collapsing under the weight of corruption. And it wasn't just Feeding Our Future. As investigators kept digging, more programs started falling apart. There was a network of autism treatment centers organizations that claimed to be providing therapy and support for children and adults with autism. Federal prosecutors now say that at least $20 million was fraudulently billed through these centers. Again, we're talking about fake clients, falsified records, and money disappearing into private accounts. Then there was the Housing Stabilization Program. This one is particularly painful because it was designed to help some of the most vulnerable people in society: seniors, people with disabilities, individuals struggling with addiction or mental illness. The program was supposed to provide support to help these people find and maintain stable housing. It was funded through Medicaid, and when it launched, the estimated cost was under $3 million a year. Within just a couple of years, online sources state that the number exploded to over $100 million annually. Why? Because the program had almost no safeguards. The barriers to entry were so low that almost anyone could sign up, create a company, and start billing the government. And that's exactly what happened. Hundreds of shell companies popped up, operating out of rundown office buildings and dilapidated storefronts. They claimed to be providing housing services to thousands of clients across Minnesota, but when investigators showed up to check, they found nothing. Empty offices, fake addresses, no clients, no services, just paperwork and bank accounts filling up with taxpayer money. So far, 8 individuals